Hey, good evening, and welcome to the Fantasy Drink. I'm Jared Quartermatch, and tonight I am going to do some commentary on Stephen R. Donaldson's essay on epic fantasy as necessary literature. Uh, so, Dr. Fantasy, Philip Chase, has done this a commentary on this essay himself about a year ago or so, and he gave me an assignment from the professor to kind of do this myself. So I had always loved this essay. I actually found it from the Malazan wiki site. Because he does mention Stephen Erickson in here for the Malazan books, and so this essay has always been one of my favorites, and because I've always believed that epic fantasy is necessary literature as well. So, first things first, tonight's drink is Captain Morgan's Private Stock, a better tasting rum than your regular spiced rum variety, and this is the kind of rum that you just drink by itself on the rocks. It's very tasty, and with that in mind, we can get right into it here. So, for my thoughts on this essay, I'd like to focus on what Donaldson says here, on his basic beliefs about fantasy. Uh, More clearly, the way the fact that we all lead made up lives, as he says. He mentions that internal mechanism by which we identify and refine our relationships with reality, and how we are all inveterate storytellers. Um, and I think it's in our biology, it's evolution. Uh, so, as Donaldson relates, we are constantly refining our perception and worldview depending on how we internally review events that happen to us, and we also try to prepare ourselves for what we think shall or will happen. So, the more things that don't happen according to our preconceptions, the more dissonance or conflict we will have with what does happen. The more we attempt to develop a narrative that fits our worldview. So, Donaldson goes on to explain how all external storytelling is fantasy and is made up. It's fiction. Um, and that's, our own daily lives, uh, externalized, maybe later on around the dinner table, what have you. So that's, those are some very key points that Donaldson brings up, and I think it's key in how human beings process their everyday lives, and that they need that kind of externalization, and that processing to fictionalize what we did for our own through our own perceptions throughout the day. And that's a key point. It reminds me of uh, Yuval Noah Harari's book *Sapiens*. I have that right here. Um, this was a brief history of humankind, and in this book, he has this fascinating chapter about the three fictions that drive human history: gods, states, and money. And he goes on to explain that humans rule the world because humans are the only animal that can believe in things that exist purely in its own imagination. So the human race made up stuff as part of its evolution into cognitive beings, and we still continue to do so today. I think that fits with Donaldson's view of epic fantasy on as necessary literature. Fantasy runs the world. Fiction runs the world, according to Harari. And so, because these fictions impact us so severely, wars of religion, territory, and resources, that is, God, states, and money, um, then we feel these real effects on our persons and the real consequences thereof. Um, and because things made up fictions, these fictions are the basis of our societies, it's quite imperative that we understand these fictions, these fantasies for what they are. It's a tool to help us understand the world. And so, what better way to understand this epic world we live in than to read epic fantasy? So that's my correlation. That's these are the kind of thoughts that I have when I read an essay like this, and it's why essays like this are so important. It's why explaining fantasy is so important. So when talking, when I talk to people about what I like to read, I come right out and say I prefer epic fantasy. Um, and I sometimes get those blank looks. I know you people on YouTube have probably gotten similar looks as well, and you've experienced this blank look. And so, um, and I had to explain all that stuff and try to attempt to explain what these books are and what they mean to me. Um, I The very fact that fantasy literature has to be fought for to be part of a curriculum in college courses, I think, is a crime against the imagination. So, you know, these days you might get when you mention the term epic fantasy, you might get oh, like Game of Thrones response, which is good. I mean, um, I love Game of Thrones. But I say, it's kind of like that because there's much more varied field than just Game of Thrones. Uh, Prior to Game of Thrones, you'd be lucky if they knew what Lord of the Rings was, or you get that dismissive tone. Oh, those fantasy movies. Um, so, bearing that in mind, whenever somebody like Donaldson puts out such an intelligent, precise, and accurate essay on why epic fantasy is so necessary, it uh, it gives us the tools that we need as well to help explain what we love about epic fantasy as well. And so essays like this help explain how we need fantasy literature to explain the world run by the fictional constructs that the human race has created in our continual evolution. And with that power to imagine, we all have the power to make the world better. And I think that this needs to be taught all the time. And essays like this, like Donaldson's essay, need to be taught all the time. I will put a link to the essay in the description below. So you will be able to read that if you haven't already. Um, and he also has an earlier essay that focuses on epic fantasy in the modern world, which he references in this one. But this is the one that really grabbed me. Um, so I believe that the study of fantasy should be taught as a cognitive tool to differentiate fantasy from reality. So you look at the reasons why what people have for doing bad things and committing horrific crimes in our society. You get the mass shootings, corporate greed, human trafficking, and so on. These underlying reasons for any of this stuff, any of these, is like the almost an inability of the perpetrators to distinguish reality from the fantasy of what they are trying to do. A gun is not the answer to anything, but the shooter believes that it is. And like treating people like cattle, you know, um, trafficking is not going to make anything better. But those who do those things believe in this fiction that they are right and they are special and they're above those they hurt. And this seems to me a failure of people who abuse others like this. to reintegrate with reality, as as Donaldson points out, that this, epic fantasy is the literature of reintegration. And so that's what I think that these people just don't get. They don't get they can't tell the difference between reality and fantasy, because hurt is real. Hurt of another being is real. The consequences of the hurt these people cause is real. That's not fantasy. And yeah, so without getting too maudlin here, I think people need to be taught what fantasy is in order to avoid the pitfalls of believing a fantasy that can hurt others, and in order to reintegrate with what it means to be human. So that is a part of what Donaldson's essay led me to think about, and led me to think about all these things and all the things in the world that go on and stuff like that. It really was an essay that brought issues to the forefront besides just reading, you know. And so, it brings up a lot of questions about why fiction, and why fantasy fiction in particular, epic fantasy in particular, is important, because it just helps us look at the big epic world we live in. So, as Donaldson states at the end of his fantasy, at the end of his essay, he says, if modern fantasy, and especially epic fantasy, serve any function at all, it lies in the ability to dramatize, to demonstrate reintegration. That's so important, it's the reintegration thing. And I think that if more people had the ability to reintegrate themselves into society in a manner that does not cause others hurt, we'll all be better off. Um, and he also states at the very end here, the in a nightmare world ruled by alienation and nausea, the quest for identity, and the comic doomsday vision. What more could be necessary? Indeed. Read, read, read. So thank you for watching tonight, and bottoms up, and be good to each other. Thank you.